And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Max Wolf, and I'm the Public Policy Manager at the Charles River Chamber. We're happy to bring to you a conversation with the three candidates running for two seats on the Needham Select Board ahead of the April 14th townwide election. Today, you'll hear from incumbent Cathy Dowd and challengers Rich Adduci and Bill Dermody. Board member Marianne Cooley will not be running for re-election. As for the parameters for today, this will be a 1 hour debate. There'll be no opening statement, but each candidate will have 90 seconds to complete the closing one. Other than that closing statement, we will not be using a timer, but I do ask that each candidate be respectful of each other's time, keep their answers concise, and focus on the questions asked. I do reserve the right to interrupt and probably will do so in the interest of time. Finally, I did let the candidates know the last question of today's debate, which is who would be on your Needham Mount Rushmore? So let's get into it. And let's start with Rich. Rich, to my knowledge, you have never run for elected office. It would be great to give the audience your professional background and your experience with town government.
Sure. First off, thanks to the chamber and thank you, Max, for hosting this event. It's great to be able to have a chance to meet everyone and talk about the issues. Um, my background here, I moved to Needham in 2023 and immediately attempted to get involved in the town government, but was unsuccessful getting chosen or even looked at for some of the town committees initially. So I actually came back and attempted to get back on in 2025 and have joined the Needham Community Revitalization Trust Fund and also the Technology Advisory Committee. I have 37 years of experience in corporations, boards, charities, and my own company working with complex organizations to deliver results. I currently am an expert in cybersecurity and work with private equity portfolio companies around the world to help protect them. I believe a lot of my experience can really come to bear here in Needham in working to build a much more collaborative select board to improve the way we listen to our constituents and make sure that we place the, the views and needs of our constituents ahead of our own on the select board so that we deliver results that our town expects and needs.
Thank you, Rich. And Cathy, feel free to give a little bit of a background too, but you're finishing up your first term on the select board. Why do you want to go back?
Well, you know what? I really enjoy it. And I think that local government, especially as we have it here in New England, is very close to people and it really gives you an opportunity to make a difference. I'm happy to say that as vice chair, in charge of making recommendations for appointments, that I recommended Rich to his two committees. And that's one of the things I enjoy, getting to know so many different people in town. And really trying to make a difference for us. On the national level, it can be very frustrating, but here locally, we can make a difference. And we are really fortunate to have a town meeting form of government. We have 240 members in that town meeting that represent their different constituencies. We have roughly 300 people on committees, and I love it, and I'm proud of our work.
Thank you. Bill, 2 years ago, you ran for state rep. I'm interested, which role do you think is a better fit for you? And yeah.
I think, being a third generation Needhamite, I think this is the better fit for me. It was quite an experience running for state legislature, and it was very humbling that people came out and supported me, in the three communities that the state legislature involves. But my heart and soul really is Needham. Consider myself a Needhamite. I've been involved with so many aspects of Needham, and I really feel like this is the best position for me. And I think my background on all the committees I've been on, and my background is chair of Park and Recreation and chair of Memorial Park Trustees. I've worked very closely with the select board, and I think that background will help my position as I get on, hopefully, to the select board.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to start with a little bit of an interesting question. If you could add one new public service or amenity to Needham with unlimited funding, what would it be? So we have one new public service and you have unlimited funding. And we're going to start with Cathy on this one.
So this is an interesting one, and I really appreciate the question. You know what I would add? I would actually add internal transportation in the town. That was something that Newton tried and I think didn't have the money for, but to help kids, to help seniors to get around so that you could get from the train anywhere you wanted, or maybe you could get from where you live to the Green Line. But I think that kind of mobility would be amazing. It would help parents of kids who need to, take their kids places. It would help seniors who really have a hard time right now when they can't drive anymore. It would be good for the environment. People could take the train more. It is very expensive. So that's my answer for, with an unlimited budget.
And Rich?
Well, it's hard for me to think about this because we don't have an unlimited budget. I mean, the reality is if we want a new service, it's coming from all of us. So rather than adding a new service, I would rather look and focus on how could we make some of our existing services more effective. For example, how could we work with business development to improve how we attract new businesses to our town and work with our town government to simplify how it is to start a business here in town. A lot of towns in the area and across the country have gone to a one-stop shop model, one window to get all that you need to start a business and one review to get your business approved and into place here in our community. We don't really have that in Needham. It's complex and difficult, and the business owners that I talk to are frustrated by the amount of review cycles that they have to go through to get started. So we should try to simplify that. And if we had time and energy, put that towards finding ways to use our green spaces more. Festivals, concerts, other ways to attract foot traffic into our commerce corridors would do wonders for our businesses and for our town's community.
Thank you. I'm going to count that as a new service. So, Bill?
Sure.
So you did say we didn't have to worry about the money, right, Max? So,
Yeah, yeah.
Cathy, you and I are kind of on the same page because we used to in Needham have what was known as the minibus. And the minibus did what Cathy said. It drove around town. It was able to pick up people at the train. It was able to pick up seniors and help them get around. And one of the biggest users, believe it or not, was the youth to get around town with, to fields and to other from schools to fields and things like that. So, and also the one thing about the minibus as well is that maybe it would get some cars off the street, which would also help the environment. So I would love to bring back the Needham minibus.
Great. Okay, now to the issues. Eventually, the select board will weigh in on which alternative for Great Plain Ave, the Great Plain Ave redesign they support. This is Envision Needham. So which layout do you support? The 2.5, or the 4-lane layout? Let's start with Bill on this one.
So I support the 4-lane layout. I know that though there is going to have to be some work done on the stormwater drains and things like that. So we'll still have some effect on the downtown, and restructuring the downtown. But when we do that, we have to make sure that we talk to the stakeholders, the businesses around here about the disruption that might occur and make sure that there's the least amount of disruption possible. And I'm sitting in my office right now, which is on Great Plain Ave. I look out there every day and I can see what the traffic looks like. And I just can't imagine going down to a 2-lane plan because I can't tell you how many times fire trucks come down Chester Street, take a left on Great Plain Ave and go by our office. And when you're 2-lane plane, if you have traffic on each side, I don't know how that would be able to be done and get to place on time. And also, people, if there's 2-lane plan, you have to think about the side streets or kind of the feeder streets in the Great Plain Ave, like maybe Warren Street. I don't think Warren Street wants a lot of traffic going down their street because of a 2-lane creating a lot of traffic. So I'm all in favor of the 4-lane plan for the Envision. And I think the results come out tomorrow night at the Envision Working Group committee meeting is tomorrow evening, and they'll get the results of the survey. And I would be surprised if the survey did not show that most people were in favor of the 4-lane plan, just like they were at the public hearing. Thanks for the warning, Max.
Thanks. And Cathy, which lane plan do you support?
I agree with Bill for similar reasons. When the plan was first proposed, I sat with business owners and, they shared with me their very deep concerns about it. And that concerned me also. ultimately they told me that they felt that the town didn't care about them, and honestly, that really made me sad. And that is not how I want the town to be. I want to acknowledge that our process in rolling this out was flawed, and those flaws really broke trust with business owners and with the community. The original plan was to do a 2-lane with bike lane pilot for 1 year, and the studying was kind of to be done in the pilot, and that caused a lot of opposition, both amongst business owners and amongst the public. So, what I tried to do was correct some of the flaws in our process. So, for example, in the earlier committee, the businesses in Needham Center were not well represented, particularly the ones who had expressed concerns about the plan. So I recommended for appointment to that working group, 2 of the business owners who had expressed concerns. I also felt that the process was flawed in that we started with a solution rather than looking at the problem and trying to figure out which solution would be best. So I proposed to the select board that we study 3 options. We study the 2-lane plan, we study basically a current state plan, and some sort of compromise. So that is what the committee has done. They're nearly done with their work. It has shown, I have seen the survey results, they are overwhelming in favor of the 4-lane plan. And, frankly, I think given that the plan was to revitalize Needham Center, and I'll finish my thought. And Needham Center businesses are the most important thing in Needham Center. They are the reason why people come to Needham Center. That unless we had the businesses on board, it's really hard for me to support it. So I agree with Bill, but I do want to acknowledge that our process should have been better.
And we'll go to Rich.
I'm from the Midwest. I kind of drive down Great Plain Avenue, and I'm not a traffic engineer, but I've got a lot of experience doing simulation work as an industrial engineer. I don't know how you could ever think 2 lanes is going to work through downtown of Great Plain, given the roads that are there. I'm disappointed that this program really damaged the trust that our businesses have in our town government, and our select board didn't do more early on to get their engagement. Clearly all of the signs that are still downtown saying not our vision are a sign that we missed an important constituent group in considering that, and also we sort of missed our residents. I think we have to really learn from this particular thing. I think we first have to think about, is the Envision program still a program that should continue? Or are there elements of the program that we should go do and maybe reframe how we go after business development? I think it would be a very difficult march for us to rebuild the trust in Envision, get our businesses behind Envision, and then use that as a vehicle for business development. My experience with projects that get to this point that are this disconnected is they always struggle to rebuild that trust. But I do think there's clearly things that need to be done. Some of them have been mentioned here. Certainly safety, first and foremost. It shouldn't be like a game of Frogger when I'm trying to cross Great Plain Avenue at the crosswalks that are not at a streetlight. Why don't we have flashing lights or other traffic signals that would help make it safer? That seems like a simple no-brainer activity or thing to do that would help everyone's safety, especially some of our younger kids that I see crossing in those spots all the time. Lastly, certainly I think stormwater drainage is important. And so we really have to take that full town stormwater study and make sure that we're applying it appropriately. That may mean we have to look at Great Plain, I'm not sure, but certainly we really need to make sure our stormwater management is adequate for the coming climate change.
So you're all talking about mistrust in the process. We've definitely seen a higher level of mistrust in our town government and elected officials in Needham in recent memory. I'm wondering, what can we do, and what would you do on the select board to rebuild that trust? We can start with Rich here.
Well, it's a good question. First and foremost, I think I would look at our committee membership and make sure that selecting committees is a wide open process and that we're aspiring to get a good representation of our town on committees. When I first moved here in 2024, I applied to multiple committees, each of them that had multiple seats available. I didn't even get phone calls back for most of them, despite being qualified for most of them. I got one email back that said I wasn't qualified because I wasn't a developer. But other than that, nothing. That seems odd since those seats remained available and open even after I got no action. I wound up picking committees that I felt I had a better shot at because they were less crucial and less coveted by the select board. Why is it a club? Getting onto a committee should be straightforward and open. We shouldn't need letters to the Attorney General to make that so. We should have an open process for getting people on committees, and truly representation should be wide open. I think that's been a problem in our town, at least for the past couple of years, and that has really impacted some of the trust that we have. Second, I think listening to the signals we get. It was very difficult, I think, for many residents to watch what happened with Envision or even MBTA, fundamentally because I think they were expressing their views pretty clearly, but those views were not translating into any adjustments in the approach that select board was taking on these issues, at least not for the majority on the select board. Often the votes were 4-1 when there wasn't a dissenting view brought, but really kind of the normal collaboration that we're used to on select board, hearing from the town and then reacting to that and taking action appropriately seems to be at issue in our town. And I would aim to fix that.
Cathy?
I agree that we want to get as many people involved as possible. And as I've mentioned, I'm currently vice chair, so it is the role of the vice chair to interview people for committees and to put their names forward. Rich, I thought was a great candidate. I put his name forward, and I guess what I was looking for, and I still have, a month left in this, is to do a couple things. First, there's many committees where, you have to have certain qualifications, have to be an architect or something like that. There's those. But then beyond that, I truly was looking for different voices on the committees. And so that's why, for example, I made sure to put forward names of opponents of Envision onto that working group. And I have also looked as much as possible to get new people involved in the process. So I think that is critical. I think what my philosophy is about these things, and having lived through the past couple of years, I think that, sometimes it's better to move more incrementally and get a wider support than to move more boldly and get a narrower support. I think we do see on the national level a pattern where one side wins with 51% and they put through their maximum program. And then there's a huge backlash. And then the other side comes in and they take away everything and put in their maximum program. I do not want that for Needham. I really value our nonpartisan government. I value the fact that we work together in Needham. That's really important to me. I mean, I think what makes Needham really great is its community, and is the fact that when there are problems, people step up and volunteer. And I have found in town government, in town meeting, for example, it's truly been inspirational to me that people come and they discuss the issues in a forthright manner, but in a way that is respectful of others, and they hear each other. So
And
that is my
Cathy, do you think
approach.
the town has been too bold in recent memory if
Well, I
you're
think in
advocating for
retrospect,
incremental change?
I guess what I would say is it's easy to fall in love with your own idea. And we have to not do that. You know what I mean? It's easy to sort of say, wow, this would really, really be great and solve a problem. But the fact is, in reality, there are often unintended consequences. There are often, people who may be negatively impacted. This is one reason government moves sort of slowly. But I think, in retrospect, for example, I'll go back to MBTA Communities Act. I supported the neighborhood plan because I thought it would be good for Needham. But in retrospect, would we all have been better off if we had been more incremental and not gone through the referendum? Yeah. I don't think that was, I don't think that was good for the town. In terms of Envision, I wish we had started not with a solution, but with an issue. How can we revitalize our downtown? How can we make it safer? How can we make it more beautiful? How can we do the drainage issues, solve them, and get the right people together and do it that way? I think the mistake was starting with the solution.
And Bill, the same question on how do we build trust back?
What I think trust is lost when there is not good communication. So we have to make sure that we have good communications with the stakeholders, but not just the stakeholders, the planning board, the PBBC, and all the town committees, but also with the residents of the town. And the businesses we saw, and I think sometimes what Cathy said is right. We come up with the answer instead of asking the question. If we wanted to, what can we do with downtown? We have these stormwater issues, so we have to fix underneath the streets downtown Needham. What would be a good suggestion to fix above instead of coming up with a plan like we think this is it? Let's get input. Let's hear from people. The communication is so key, and it's hard to get that communication out. The chamber does a great job getting information. The Needham Local and the Needham Observer get information, but without a town paper, it makes it more difficult. So one of my thoughts that I've said is let's have someone from each precinct in town meeting, there's 10 precincts, become like a precinct captain. And not for their fellow town meeting members who already know what's going on, but for their precinct and maybe get the PTCs involved and hold a local issues forum a couple times a year, maybe in the schools or in that local community within each of that precinct so people can know what's going on. And as far as committees are concerned, I have applied for a lot of committees. I've got on some, I haven't got on others. And I really think that what we need to do is the vice chair interviews them, they can make a recommendation. But if someone feels that they might have just been as good or been as good as the candidate that was proposed, they should have the opportunity to go in front of the select board and state their case as well. Which I think the select board is looking at changing that process right now.
Thank you. And Rich, you
Actually,
wanted a quick
yeah,
response?
yeah. Could I just add one thing to that? I mean, I think I agree with Cathy and Bill that open communication is so central, for sure. But I think, particularly in the case of Envision, it goes a little bit beyond that. I think one, Cathy said it well, it's putting your own interest behind what the town wants and really understanding what the town wants. That's really central. And then second, we have to be transparent. I think if you review all of the presentations around Envision and you kind of weed through the 3 or 4 presentations on branding that were in there, it wasn't really clear what was intended by Envision. But clearly there was a desire to get to 2-lane roads and bike lanes. I find I work with a lot of complex teams and solve really difficult problems. And the thing that gets in the way the most is when you're not transparent with people about what you're trying to do. Then when people figure that out, because our people are very smart in town, that leads to mistrust.
Thank you. So, in terms of Envision, it seems like you're all in favor of the 4-lane layout. So that's basically keeping Great Plain Ave more or less pretty similar. And you believe that change won't help businesses, or changing to a 2-lane wouldn't help businesses. So, what will help our Needham Center businesses? Because it's not like Needham Center is really thriving to any extent. And we could start with Cathy on this one.
Well, I think what we really need to do is listen to them. So first of all, do no harm, right? And listen to what they want. I think second, I think Rich's point about making permitting and the whole process easier is important. We had the situation at Muzzy Ford, for example, where they had an idea a number of years ago to build lab space. It took a while for that permitting to get through. And by the time it did, the lab market had collapsed. Now, I don't know that that would have actually worked if we had been quicker, but that was an example. So I think that making things easy for business and listening to business is what we can do best to help them. I think the business people know their businesses and they're very capable, but let's smooth the way for them.
Thanks. And Bill, what can we do to help our Needham Center businesses if
Well,
not
I
change
think
the
when
road?
hopefully we will do the 4-lane plan and we will do some infrastructure. And I think we need to look at some beautification of maybe some more trees and maybe some other things. Even while we were sitting here, I was just looking out my window and they were coming to empty the meters of the quarters. Okay. even something as simple as replacing the meters, which we know I know we are doing, just something as simple as that will help the businesses. So I can't tell you how many times people come in looking for quarters, right? So we'll just something as simple as that. And also the permit process to help people understand the permit process. I know someone who recently was opening a business in town. So they go to the building department and say, can I open this business in this town? And they say yes. But then they don't realize that they have to go to get their sign checked out. They don't realize if they're going to serve food, they have to go to the health department. They don't realize the other place. So we could have, and I'm so happy we have that economic development advisor. We have someone we just put in place that can help with things like that. And I think that person would be able to discuss with the businesses and help with the business. So if you move to town, it's not like jumping through hoops to get, whatever you want to do up and running. But I would disagree a little bit with you, Max, because I don't think our downtown is horrible right now. I think we have a pretty good downtown right now.
Okay, I mean, we definitely have some elements of a good downtown, but for example, Needham restaurants are not doing too well. I mean, their revenue has only rised 9% since the pandemic. That's well below inflation. Meanwhile, in Newton, the restaurants are revenue is up 25%. Wellesley reported 42% gains. This data is from the BBJ. So they're doing much better. So, Rich, what can we do to help our downtown businesses and our restaurants?
It's a great question. I'm the only one of us that's a small businessman. I would say that, first of all, it's really hard to start a business. It's a lot of risk. You place a lot of faith in the place that you choose to start your business because you're taking a tremendous amount of personal risk and putting a lot of personal sweat equity into anything you do. I think first and foremost, we have to repair the trust that we have with our businesses. We can't expect new businesses to think we're a great place to work and to start a business when all of the windows in town say not our vision. We have to solve that and bring the relationship with our businesses back to a better place than it is. Second, it's being easy to do business with, which is not just simplifying the process, that's a big part, but it's also being very transparent. We can't be like Lucy, where when we tell Charlie Brown to kick the football, we take the football away during the planning review cycles. It's got to be very clear what it's going to take to get the job done for a business owner because they have precious little time. I can tell you that myself from personal experience. We need to make it easier for them to access programs, both programs we have internally to Needham, programs at the state level and at the federal level. There's lots of things to help small businesses, but most small business people have no idea those resources are available. We should make that simple and easy. And then last and not least, I just want to hit on this again. And actually, Josh mentioned it 2 years ago. How come we don't make our downtown greens more vibrant? And I don't mean just trees. I mean, yes, sure, trees, of course, but why don't we make that an actual gathering place by finding ways to sponsor events downtown, which drives foot traffic, which will make a real difference for our town businesses?
Yeah, and does anyone want to
Max, if I
respond to
could
that?
just go back to talk about the restaurants for a minute, uh, my wife hates it, but I don't cook. She's a great cook and I love it. So I like to give her a break by taking her out to dinner. And there are so many, now I just feel there are so many great choices in Needham, and I patronize all of them. And when I go to all of them, they seem to be doing very well. So I'm a little surprised by your numbers, but I'm glad, there seems to be more vibrant restaurants now than ever. And have been a couple new ones that came in, and I think people need to learn them. And now they've learned them and they're patronizing them. And I'm glad to hear they're not down. You said they're up, not as much as Newton. So I still think the restaurants are doing well within the town. And as
Well,
I said, I patronize all of them.
well, they're still well below inflation. Kathy, any reaction to those numbers? How do we help our restaurants who are
Well,
struggling compared to our
I
peer
know,
communities?
yeah, I think one thing that has been an issue is parking and parking requirements. So there are times that this is sort of a permitting thing and then a reality thing. To get a permit, sometimes you need to be able to show that there's enough parking. I think we may have been too strict on that. But then the other thing is the reality of it. And we have done some parking studies that I think are interesting. And one of the things, I mean, obviously we could build parking that's a bigger project, but short of that, we've looked at some interesting pricing models. So we are changing from the coin operated parking meters to an app. But you could change the pricing, for example, to make it cheaper to price where it's a little bit of a walk, maybe, to encourage people to park in those other places, even simple things like signage. There's also things that we could do where the town could partner with some of the private owners of the lots, like Walgreens and others, to free up public parking there, because I think that has been a barrier. So I think there's some interesting creative things that we can do. With what we currently have. And then, I'd be open to thinking about ways of creating more because I have heard that that is a barrier.
And Newton just significantly reduced and eliminated some commercial parking minimums. Um, would you advocate for the total elimination of commercial parking minimums to help our businesses fill their storefronts and
You know
expand
what?
in town?
I can't take a position on that right now. I think it's something that it's worth studying and understanding it. This is sort of back to the earlier point that there's always an unintended consequence. So, and I'm not a planner, so I don't know what the right number is, but I think we should be creative about maximizing what we currently have. And I don't think we are. We have, you know, not enough parking in certain places and then other parking that is not being utilized, and we have the potential for public private partnerships out there. So I think that there are things that we can do to optimize our current inventory of spaces and, maybe make it easier to permit with fewer parking spaces. But yeah, I can't speak to that because I simply
No, you beat me,
don't
Rich.
know enough.
And Rich, so Newton just reduced commercial parking minimums and even eliminated them in some cases. Do you think Needham should follow that model?
I don't know if elimination is the right thing to do. I agree with Cathy that the law of unintended consequences can kick in here. I would want to study that more than I have to really have a position on it. But I think reducing it makes sense. I think also, look, my wife and I moved here in 2023, and we conducted an exhaustive review of towns in this area along the I-95 corridor, looking for a place that is a great place to live, that's walkable, that has a vibrant downtown. And we picked Needham after looking at places like Newton and Wellesley and all the other places you'd imagine, Lexington. First of all, in our review, one of the things we found is there just aren't very many of them. So actually, Needham is in the minority compared to most towns around us in terms of having a good downtown. It should be better. You're right, Max. We have too many open storefronts. Our businesses are not doing as well as they could, and we need to find ways to make it more vibrant and create that virtuous circle where people are shopping and going to dinner and coming downtown more rather than just going for a particular errand. That is something that we need to look at. But I also think we have to look at why does it on things that are more obvious, how come our town takes so long to address them? Parking's a great one. I think this has been a problem that the businesses have talked about for many, many, many years. But still, I've got a little coin purse like all of us in my car with quarters to be able to park. It seems I couldn't believe it when I moved here and I couldn't use a credit card or an app. For such a town filled with smart people, so modern, how come we're stuck in the 50s?
And Bill, I'm going to give you a chance to respond on the parking question. Do we need to do more on parking?
You always need to do more on parking. That we've been talking about parking forever, and we always need to do more on parking. We've taken care of the meters, so that I think is a good thing. I think one thing that Cathy might have mentioned is signage. I don't think people know where there is public parking. They know behind like Bagel's Best. That's it. They know that. They don't know that there's a place off Dedham Ave that you could go to and park. And if there's good weather, it's not that far from downtown. So I definitely think we need to look at, looking at that parking. And one thing Rich mentioned, I'm in real estate and we have people coming here and, they are looking at a lot of different towns. And one thing they love about Needham is not many people have a Needham downtown common like we have. And everyone says, wow, we love that you have a downtown common. And we worked recently and in the past years, and I was lucky to be part of town meeting that voted to help redevelop and redesign that. And it's a beautiful space. And I do think there is an opportunity to do and have more events there.
Thank you. So we're talking about helping our businesses, and something our businesses tell us that hasn't helped them is the constant cycle of plastic bans, especially restaurants. Over the past several years, different versions of these plastic bans have been brought to town meeting, and although they help the environment, some have definitely cut into businesses' bottom lines. So, do you think the town should continue to pursue these plastic bans? Do you think it's productive that we're getting new proposals every year? I'm interested to hear what Bill you have to say.
So, I just saw an article today in the New York Times about microplastics, and plastics are a big, big thing. And I have two grandchildren, and I want them to be able to enjoy the environment and not have a terrible environment as they grow up and as they get older. So, I think we continue to look at them, but again, we have to, and I think we're going to hear this word a lot, but the unintended consequences of them. Because what is it going to cost a restaurant owner if we do something like this? Let's talk to the stakeholders about what happens if we do something like this. It's great to be green, but we have to think about how it affects people and how it affects businesses. I'm all for everything we can do, but again, we don't want to have unintended consequences where the cost is so much for a business or a restaurant that it puts them out of business and we had an empty spot and need them. That's the last thing we want.
And Rich, there's been several years in a row of consistent plastic bans going to town meeting. Do you think that's productive? And do you think we should continue to pursue these bans?
I think I agree with Bill. We have to really look at the actual broader consequences of making these decisions. I think there's some things that you can do that are sensible. Do we really want to allow water, light bulb sized water bottles for a couple of ounces in town? Maybe looking at the size of some of the things that we're doing to reduce the amount of waste that gets produced by drinking, really small water bottles could be something that could be done. You could look at things like cutlery that where you can get reasonably priced cutlery that's more economically friendly than the plastics are. That's a reasonable step. I think the outright ban on water bottles, plastic water bottles, is a really difficult step. It puts a lot of pressure on businesses and can take a lot of their profit and their revenue off the table instantly. So I think we have to be really, really careful about making sweeping decisions like no more plastic water bottles, because at the end, a lot of the other alternatives, unless you're going to force them to aluminum, which is very expensive, the cardboard ones are not recyclable either. So you don't really gain anything with it.
You mentioned cutlery as a more of an easy step. Do you think we should pursue getting rid of plastic cutlery in our restaurants, or no?
Well, I don't run a restaurant, so I'd want to talk to the restaurants myself and understand the impacts to them and how what could be reasonably done. I believe there are much better alternatives in that space that would offer some relief to the environment while also being economically or environmentally sensitive. Before I had a formal position, I would want to meet with the businesses and understand the impacts because, again, I think as we've all talked about, our town needs to do more of that before we start making decisions that affect the businesses here in town.
Kathy, do you think these bans are productive, and should we be pursuing our environmental goals through bans on restaurants?
So I want to back up a little bit on this one and talk about the context. So on the one hand, we know that plastics are really deadly to human health. On the other hand, the problem for businesses is that the replacement products are too expensive, right? And so in the ideal world, we would want more businesses to make the replacements in greater volumes and bring the price down, which means that it would be better to have regulation, frankly, at a national level, which we know is impossible, failing that at a state level so that it would force somebody, or not force, it would give an opportunity to someone to start making those alternatives and make them cheaper. So that's kind of where we are. We'd all rather have the regulation come higher and then have cheaper alternatives so that actually it wouldn't hurt the businesses at all to switch away, right? The reason why I think people pursue these things at a town level is that the state sometimes is reluctant to act until they see a lot of towns doing it. And so that's kind of the conundrum that we're in. I think it would be better if it was at a higher level of government hence to get cheaper alternatives to businesses. But if they're not willing to act, people will still continue to push it on a local level. And it's a difficult problem. And I think we're all, looking to find that right sweet spot there where we're trying to improve human health without hurting our local businesses.
And I think we could look at other things like how are we sourcing things? You look at in town, you look at trash collection. I have what seems like four different services driving down my little tiny street of Coolidge each week to pick up trash. That is tremendously wasteful for the environment and probably not giving me the lowest price available because the town's power to negotiate a lower price may not be used. I'd really like to see us look at some of the ways we're sourcing in town, not just, related to plastics, but could we find ways to source in town and get better environmental outcomes?
Kathy, you to respond there?
Yeah, I just want to address the issue of trash pickup because the town did undergo a major study. As we all know, we have the RTS or the dump, where people come and to leave their trash and their recycling, et cetera. But there was a major study done to see if people wanted trash pickup done by the town. The town doesn't do it currently. And what the study found was that the majority of people did not want it if they had to pay more for it. And they would have to pay more for it. Either the town would have to buy dump trucks or they'd have to engage a contract. So that is just some context to understand.
Right. Could I just clarify? I didn't mean to say no trash pickup. What I meant to say is not four companies doing trash pickup. So that's my main point is when you have four trucks driving down the road, that is not really good for the environment.
And if I could just respond, since it is private entities doing it, not the town, it's going to be whichever companies wish to provide that service.
Okay. Sorry, we have to move on. We definitely want to get to housing, which is a huge issue for our businesses. Real quickly, which MBTA community's compliance plan did you vote for? Let's start with Rich right here.
I voted for the base plan. I felt that as I looked at all the information that was available to me, I was brand new to town. So the whole thing was surprising to me, honestly, that it was that it had brewed all the way up to a referendum. But I was glad that actually people did speak up. That is a sign of our town working and expressing itself and making sure that they're being heard. But ultimately, when I looked at the facts and what was being proposed, I didn't see enough considering what the implications of the larger build would be on our town's infrastructure, our town's services, our taxes, our schools, traffic. There's a lot of implications when you bring that much high density housing to locations, and I just didn't really see that clearly spelled out. And so going with a base plan that we could then move beyond if we felt that there was benefit made sense to me rather than going all in. Felt like we were dialing it up to 11.
And your website says that you will work to create a revised zoning plan that ensures, good insight into development. So what would a revised zoning plan that you put forward look like?
Well, certainly I just want to make sure that I think ultimately the MBTA plan or law is something that we want to comply with. And so making sure the zoning that's in place incents the right kind of development that's mixed. And it's a tricky one because obviously the law itself doesn't permit mixed use. So it's a little bit difficult to comply with the law and do what we would want because most of our stops are in commerce corridors.
Mm-hmm.
So
and I would add that under new regulations, actually, you can do mixed use in the MBTA.
Oh, great. Okay,
plan. But the town is currently in compliance. But are you saying you want a revised plan? Or I'm a little bit confused. What you mean by that?
I'm saying I just want to make sure we are complying with it. That at the end, as we're developing and growing and seeing developers come to town, we're making sure that we comply with the plans and that we're really developing the sort of vision that the state had when they created this law.
Okay. I just want to confirm for the audience that we are currently in compliance. Kathy, which plan did you vote for?
Well, I do just want to say that compliance means passing the zoning. So once we passed our base plan, which was compliant. We have complied. I did support the neighborhood plan in 2024. I thought it was good for Needham. I thought it would create some much needed housing, both at different price points for seniors, for new families. I thought it would revitalize the Chestnut Street corridor. And it was extensively studied in terms of traffic, in terms of the impact on the schools, et cetera, and found to be manageable. It also would have been a net benefit to our tax coffers. That said, as I said earlier in this debate, given the opposition and given what we went through as a town, I think a more incremental approach would have in fact been better. But I think that housing is truly the most important issue facing this whole region. I will say I read an article in the Globe that said that of all the states, Massachusetts had the fifth highest out-migration last year. And the reason for that was the high cost of housing. And that is really putting a strain on our businesses in the region if they cannot attract employees, because they cannot pay for rent. So really critical issue.
And Bill, same question to
So,
you, real quick. Which one did you vote for?
so at the town meeting when we held it, I voted for the neighborhood plan. After talking to a lot of people who were upset and didn't want that, when it came to the vote, at the ballot box, I voted for the base plan. And I realized that I think the base plan was the best solution. And when it came to town meeting, we were able to vote the base plan, and now we are in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. I think what we need to do now is work very closely with the planning board and looking at the parcels that are within the Communities Act and finding housing, because as Cathy said, housing is so key and it's the key for everything. And I think the housing we need to do is smaller units, smaller projects that like maybe 700 square feet, 800 square feet, so they're not as expensive as the bigger units for rentals, for example. And maybe some of the workforce housing could live in some units like that. I've talked to restaurant owners and they say, wouldn't it be great if some of our workers could live in some workforce housing within the town of Needham and not have to commute these long distances to come and work here?
Yeah, and our businesses often say that housing affordability and availability is their number one issue. They're really struggling, to attract and retain talent. I mean, over 30 businesses signed on to support the neighborhood plan at the end of the day. So, when is it appropriate time to review the base plan and decide whether you need to expand it? Rich, you touched on a little bit, but at what point do we look at the base plan and say, this is not enough or this is enough?
Well, I think, step one is making sure we have developers working on the base plan so that we actually get some of the housing stock built. I know we're making some progress now with Carter's and some of the new projects that are being proposed, but I think we really want to make sure we're doing what we can to attract developers and work to get some of these new projects built. I think as we start to make progress with that, 2, 3 years down the line, it would make sense to revisit that. But I'm with Bill. I think in the short term, I would start looking at what could we do to incent building smaller houses, and so that we even it up a little bit. Today, on small lots, unfortunately, it becomes much better economically for builders to build larger houses. That makes sense. We don't want to cheat seniors on their property value, but we need to find ways to also create spaces that are make sense to build small houses on, and that developers want to do that. And that's been a problem for us, I think, in the last few years.
And we'll definitely get to the single family issue. But for now, Cathy, when is it a good time to review the base plan and think about the neighborhood plan?
I'm not sure ever. I think that doing it on such a large fashion maybe isn't the right way to go. I think that looking project by project and seeing what we can do that makes sense is perhaps a better way. I think that, it was a very unusual situation with the MBTA communities law where we had to comply with the law. And then the question was, do we want to simply comply or do we want to use it as an opportunity to go a bit further? But I think that we can do this incrementally. I think we can look, when developers come and they have good projects and they're sited in places either in a commercial area, like for example, Needham Center, getting that to be more mixed use, I think would be great. We have a lot of one-story buildings with businesses on the bottom. you could put a couple stories of apartments on top of those. I think that would be great.
Um, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, over 30 businesses, signed on to support the neighborhood plan. There was a huge push for more housing, and I think all of you recognize the need for more housing. So, Bill, and I mean, any of you can respond after. Is there a time to reevaluate the base plan, see if it's built enough housing for the town?
There is a time to reevaluate it once we've implemented some things through it. We have not done anything through it at all yet. So we want to look at the housing, see whether it's worked, and then see if it doesn't work. And maybe it probably will be, like Rich said, maybe 2 to 3 years to see when this happens. But in the meantime, let's work with the local developers. Let's see things we get done. There's a program called the LIP, which is a local initiative program. There is a development going in right across the street from McDonald's. When you drive out from the drive-through today after you get your Shamrock Shake for St. Patrick's Day. Look, and you can see right there, there's going to be great units there, and they're going to be small units. They're not going to be these big, the problem is when you big, the big apartment buildings, they're expensive. They're $3,000, $4,000. These, when they're smaller units, they won't be as expensive. And I know you said we'll get into the single family homes a little bit later, but I also have some ideas on that as well.
Yeah. Cathy, do you have any
Yeah, no, I mean,
response?
as I said, I was in favor of the neighborhood plan, but I think we have to recognize what the residents of Needham are comfortable with and work within that. And I think that there are many ways, as Bill was saying, there are many individual projects that can be done that will not, damage the single family character of the town, that will be well sited in areas that are either already multifamily or already commercial, that will add vitality to those areas and that will add housing at different price points. And I think that would be the way to go. I think we are seeing some of those, come before us, and I think we can proceed that way. But we need more housing. There is no question. I'm just not sure that a big blanket program is the way to get that done.
And one final thought that Cathy mentioned, downtown maybe having retail and living space above. And there's a perfect example of that on the corner right here of Maple, of Maple and Great Plain, where in the first floor is retail and upstairs is living space. Now that's expensive living space, so we want to do it so it can be more affordable, both for workforce housing and maybe for some of the young people so they can stay in town, like my children.
Okay, so there's a great example of that going forward. I think this town meeting to rezone Hillcrest Gardens site for mixed use development. Very quickly, do you support that project? We start with Rich here.
Um, I I would support looking at that as an option. I would want to get deeper into that particular zoning rule. I think in our town, some of our zoning changes have had some unintended consequences or that potential. So I really do want to make sure that we're being thoughtful. But I would support trying to increase access.
And Bill, that petition go to town meeting. You might have to vote on it.
Yes, it's very unique project because it's coming from the developer, not the planning board. Usually zoning changes are coming from the planning board. So it's a very unique project where it's coming from a citizen to rezone, because remember,
Mhm.
it's rezoning the district. So
Yep.
again,
So would you support it?
again, I am leaning towards supporting it, but I know the developer is having a Zoom that I'm going on next week. I want to talk more. There's been neighbors that are very concerned about what's going to happen. I'm leaning towards it because it does kind of flow right from that business district to the section next door. But we want to make sure that it's done well so that no unintended consequences that we've talked about previously.
And so, Cathy, this is like it's a mixed use project, retail on the bottom, housing on the top. Do you support it? And would you support it on the select board? Would you vote for it if it came to you for you to take the position?
So I'm going to be kind of a process nerd here and say that, as Bill said, it normally these things go to the planning board. In this case, the developers decided to do it as a citizen's petition through town meeting, so they're going to need to get a 2/3 vote. The planning board will be looking into this, and the planning board will vote on whether to recommend or not recommend it. I'm interested in seeing what the planning board has to say because they are the planning experts.
Well,
In principle,
what about
well,
your opinion? Yeah.
let me finish.
Mhm.
Getting there. In principle, I definitely would like to see mixed use. This is a different one though, because what they're actually asking for, they're not asking to build housing. They're already allowed to build housing. They're asking to extend the business district. So that is why they need the two-thirds vote in town meeting. If they only wanted housing, they'd only need a 50% vote, which is now state law. So the one concern I have with this, which was something that a lot of people in the neighborhood had, was this is a detail, but I think it's a critical detail, is there's going to be underground parking. Where does it exit? Does it exit right onto Great Plain Avenue across from Greens Field, where you have all these little kids and everybody walking to the Needham House of Pizza, or does it exit in the back? I know they've been making efforts to. It's a tricky thing. There's all these different landowners that are in the back there, but I'd love to see them have it exit in the back, or at least make every humanly possible effort to do that.
Definitely traffic flow there is something we really have to take a look at, but wouldn't it be great to get that property back into something that's being utilized again? It's a great location. So if that development could move forward and we could solve some of those problems, that would be terrific and of course good for the property owner as well.
Yep.
If
And
Max,
Cathy,
if I
one
could
second.
just add
Mhm.
something there, I think this particular property also is very emotional for a lot of people in town. So I live down the street from it, and we bought into the town in 1997. And for decades, we walked past that property when it was full of beautiful flowers and plants. And it was gorgeous. And it was sort of a gateway to Needham Center. And I just think we can't underestimate that in terms of how people approach this property. I know that's gone. I know that's not coming back, but I think it's in people's hearts as they think about what that property is going to be. So I'm just putting it out there as a reality of how many residents feel about that particular parcel.
Okay. Now to the last question of today's debate. Who would be on your Needham Mount Rushmore? And we'll start with Bill.
So this was a very interesting question, and I thought long and hard about it. And my first one would be William Carter, from the Carter building that recently got torn down, unfortunately. He brought, children's manufacturing of clothing. He didn't need them. He doesn't own it, and the family doesn't own it anymore, but they still are the largest manufacturer of children's clothing in the world. He also was very involved and a benefactor of the Methodist Church. He donated parcels of land to build a cricket field on, to build a library on. There was a church, the Carter Church, that was named after him. So I think he is a very worthy person to be up there on the first one on the Mount Rushmore. And something he did, which I thought was very interesting, he gave half Saturdays off to his employees, which was like unheard of back then. So he was very, thoughtful of his employees as well. The second one would be Henry Hersey. He was known as Mr. Commuter Rail, and he advocated for rebuilding the commuter rail. When the Needham actually lost commuter rail service when the Southwest Corridor was being done back in 1979, and then the trains came back in 1987 and they renamed the Birds Hill Station. If you take the train, you know the Hersey Station. You may not know who it's named after, but it's named after Henry Hersey. I was lucky enough to actually know him. The third
Bill,
one,
I'm gonna ask you to do the last two pretty fast, if that's okay.
I'll do the third one fast. I can't guarantee the fourth one. James Hugh Power whose Powers Hall is named after, longest serving town meeting member. And we go to, the Powers Hall when we're in town meeting. The last one I'm going to take a personal liberty with, I think, and actually name my grandmother. And I'm trying not to get emotional on this, but and so I'll take a deep breath. My grandmother, Frances Dermody, was at the Needham Community Council in 1940. She became executive secretary. She stayed there till 1965. She got station wagons involved during World War II to act as ambulances in case they were needed for any efforts. Luckily, they never were needed for war efforts, but they were actually needed when they had the Coconut Grove fire. She was also very involved in making sure veterans and servicemen were entertained when they came back from the war and were in Needham. And on top of all that, she made great muffins.
That's great. That's great. Cathy?
So I second William Carter. I would add another connection to the Needham Community Council, Leslie B. Cutler. She was a pioneering woman elected official. She was the first woman elected to select board, second woman elected to the Massachusetts Senate. She also acquired the land for Cutler Park and was the head of the Needham Community Council for, I think, 30 years. Um, a favorite, Sunita Williams, astronaut. How cool is that? And she also comes back to the schools, and how great for our kids, so wonderful. And then William Nahoyden, who was the Native American leader who negotiated the deed for the land which was then Dedham. He's a complicated figure. He had his foot in both camps, but despite all that, he was also a highly educated person. He did try to support the Native Americans who were being jailed on Deer Island and attempted to stop King Philip's War.
Thank you. Rich?
It's always tough going last on these lists because some of your choices get taken. But William Carter, of course, Carter Clothes, largest manufacturer of children's clothes, but he was also quite a philanthropist, politician, and he was on select board. Sunita Williams, of course, an astronaut, but just also the work that she's done to advance science through her work at NASA is pretty impressive, and she's held many records from her time in space. Thomas Weller, who's a Nobel Prize winning immunologist. He helped develop the polio vaccine, his work contributed to that. So I think that's a worthy person for our Mount Rushmore. And then finally, of course, Leslie Cutler, Dynamo, who just did so much in our town, aside from everything that Cathy said, and she gave a very good summary. Also part of the suffragette movement. She was a strong advocate for mental health and gender equality and just made such a difference, not only in our town, but in our state.
Thank you all, and we appreciate you participating in the debate. Everyone should get it recorded in their inbox after this, and good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.